Thanks, Brandon, for reminding me. I'll just make sure I cut that out. But anyways, thank you guys for joining today. This is the Money Talk with Billy Zerillo. I am super excited to have our guests on today. We are two advisors that are definitely excited about financial advising, and I wanted to bring on a different perspective because there's a lot when it comes to financial advising, and so like I said, two people, two advisors talking shop. So I'm really excited about that today. But if you are going to be listening today, just let us know in the comment section. We'd love to give you a shout out. And if you're going to be listening to us on Spotify or Apple, make sure you download that and then go check out the rest of the episodes. So, but without further ado, I'm going to bring up my guest and my friend, Brandon Galici. What is going on? How are you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well, Billy. It's good to be here. Always love chatting with you. So excited to talk some shop, talk all things finance, financial planning. Looking forward to today.
Yeah, and we've been meaning to do this for a while now, and I'm just, like I said, I'm just super excited about this. So we'll definitely get into how we met and that whole 9 yards. But before we get into that, because people that are going to be listening, watching this, have no idea who you are, right? So tell us a little about who you are and what you do.
Yeah. So believe it or not, I did not originally want to become a financial planner. I wasn't 13
Really?
years old and think, oh, I'm going to be a financial planner when I grow up. So instead, I started college as a sports broadcasting major, and I really wanted to be a play-by-play. Had an opportunity to call, I think, over 100 games. Now, to be fair, some of those 100 games were legitimately peewee football, so 6 to 12-year-olds playing football on Sundays. So that was a ton of fun, but realized there really wasn't much of a job market in the play-by-play space. So I still do love sports, but I kind of set that aside and got really connected to the finance program. One of the finance professors at my school, West Liberty University, small D2 school in Wheeling, West Virginia, just fell in love with finance. I started doing taxes my senior year and working with real life human beings sitting across the desk and getting to talk to them about taxes, and other money questions would come up. And I absolutely loved that and learned more about what it would be like to become a financial advisor. Got hired by a large financial services firm right after school. And then after 3 or so years of doing that, went independent and launched Galici Financial. So that's kind of the journey in a nutshell.
That's awesome, man. I think you're right. Most people don't wake up, just like most people don't wake up wanting a 60 or 70 page financial plan. Most people are not like, man, I can't wait to be a financial advisor, right? Like, it's just probably not high on the list, or not even high on the job. And it's probably a lot because we don't know a lot about money as college students. So we don't really think about someone advising us on the money that we don't have. So,
Right.
but, so you were in West Virginia. Now, where are you currently located now?
So I'm in Southern California, a city called San Juan Capistrano. So it's about 40 to an hour to LA to the north, and then about an hour to San Diego to the south. So kind of right in the middle there. So we're recording this in end of November right now, and I think it's going to be sunny and 70 later today. So absolutely love the weather compared to where I was at on the East Coast in West Virginia. So a little humble brag.
Yeah. It's 34 right now. It's windy in Pennsylvania, and it's not fun. At least maybe I can live vicariously through you and all your social media, so to speak. So how did you end up in Cali? Like, what led you to there? Was it through financial advising, or is it for another reason? I don't even know this myself.
Yeah, no, fair enough. No, so it's through my wife. So I met my wife in Orlando, Florida. Believe it or not, you're like, okay, well, that's also not California. But I'll keep the long story short. She ended up she moved to Florida. She's my wife, Amanda. She's originally from California, Southern
Okay.
California, and my parents had just moved there after college. So I never lived in Florida. But when I went to visit my parents, I met Amanda. We hit it off really well. Somehow convinced her to move to West Virginia so she's from California, goes to Orlando, Florida, convinced
Big
her to move to West
change.
Virginia. And then we decided, I was a little bit stubborn at first, I'll be totally honest, but through some premarital counseling, I was more open to the idea. And we got married in September 2020 and then moved in April of 2021. So coming up on about 3 years now that we've been in Southern California, and all of her family's out here. So it's good to be close to family for sure.
Yeah, that's good. That's the one thing. If you're going to move a significant place, it's tough to not have family around. Whether it's
Absolutely.
your wife's family or your family, it's beneficial to have some family around. So that's good. Um, so you got into financial advising because of doing taxes, which is amazing. Most people, I would feel like most people with that route would probably end up in the CPA route, but financial advising, CPA, we do a lot of the similar things anyways. So talk about who you work with, because I think that's interesting as a financial advisor, who you work with and why.
Yeah. So kind of the non-typical client that you kind of alluded to there, Billy. So right now it's Henry's, so high earners, not rich yet, and entrepreneurs. So typically what that means is looking at millennials, maybe 40s, early 40s. I even work with some Gen Z clients as well, because traditionally the financial planning industry, is obviously you very well know, requires you to have money before you could get advice about your money. And I think that's backwards. So how am I able to serve a new generation that might not have the investable assets yet, because they simply just haven't lived long enough to accumulate, let that compound interest take effect, but they've got income and they're starting to have families, their income is growing and they're getting complex with their financial situation, but they don't know who to turn to. So that's really where my sweet spot is, to be able to serve those people before they have significant investable assets, and answer the questions about taxes. Should they buy a house? How much debt should they have? Things like that. And just really have meaningful conversations around how do they live a more fulfilled life? Because at the end of the day, money, yeah, that's the important part. That's numbers. It's incredibly important. But what's more important is you're also enjoying your life and you're enjoying the journey, while also preparing to be wealthy in the future.
Yeah. And as a millennial, right? And I totally resonate with that. And because like you said, we're not the traditional, and we'll get into traditional financial planning here soon. But we're not the traditional client, we're not the traditional AUM client. And so, being able to help somebody, as an advisor, but still, like you said, we have a job, we have things we need to put food on the table too, and still being able to work with them in a profitable way is still beneficial. But like you said, as we get older, we have kids, we have houses, we have jobs, we have this, that. Our situation is just as complicated as somebody that has, maybe a little bit more assets. It's just maybe a couple different questions, right? They're being asked, but regardless, financial planning is financial planning, and I think you would agree with that. So,
For sure.
um, so let's talk about how we met, right? Because that's an interesting story, and you would think, right? And I don't know how you feel, and you could, I want to get your opinion on this. When you first got into the industry, right, and you were working for, for the larger, I think both of us came from a captive company, right? A captive, so to speak, firm.
Right.
And so, you know, for me, when I first got into the industry, I'm competitive. I know you're competitive, and you probably saw a lot of other advisors as, as almost competition. Like you didn't want to talk to them, you didn't want to have conversations with them. Do you feel the same? Did you feel the same way then, or were you kind of like, hey, no, like I'm just gonna go do my thing?
Yeah, I think at the beginning, I would say it was a mixed bag. So I was at, like you said, a large financial services firm, one where I was literally going around Wheeling, West Virginia, knocking on doors. So
Yeah.
wouldn't want to go back to that, but definitely learned a lot of lessons from doing that. But there was a decent culture where some of the older advisors would try to be helpful because people were in different regions, and at that time the business model was very, very localized. Where that was pre-COVID. Zoom wasn't really a thing. The firm actually didn't even have Zoom approved until a month or two into COVID. So there was no virtual meetings essentially at that point. So there wasn't a lot of competition from that perspective locally at the same firm. But whenever it came to other advisors or other firms, it almost felt like, oh, my firm has to be better than this firm. So maybe there was more competition. But then to your point, Billy, now that I've gone independent, at first I thought when I went independent, oh, I'm going to be isolated. I'm going to be on this island, and I'm not going to have as many advisor friends, and everyone's competition. But actually the opposite has happened. I have way more connections now and connected to some of the best advisors in the industry. I mean, that's how we met through Elements, which I'm sure we'll get into in a moment as well. And it's definitely more of an abundance mindset versus the scarcity mindset, which is kind of definitely more of what I felt earlier on, maybe similar to you.
Yeah. Yeah. And 100%. Moving into a more independent aspect. And then especially like what you told us earlier. And I think a lot of people don't understand this about financial advisors is that a lot of us, especially these days, like, and I believe this is where the industry is going. A lot of us are becoming specialized, right? You think about a doctor, they're specialized, right? You go to a heart doctor because you have heart problems, or a brain, you to a neurologist, right? To go get that taken care of. And once you become that specialized, the level of competition, I guess, so to speak, if you want to call it that, it kind of the barrier kind of gets diminished. Would you kind of agree on that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if we both have different target markets, then we're not even chasing after the same people, right? So I think that's going to reduce the competition. And I think too, once you have a couple years in the industry, you realize that not I'm arrogant if I think that everyone should be working with me, right? And I think that has also been a maturation process too. Of yes, the specialty is a huge one, and I think also paired with that, there's so many people out there that need real financial advice. Like I would much rather so many people be working with you and a lot of these other great financial planners than, maybe a lot of the other firms in the industry. So because of that, it's like that I think really helps with the abundance side and that lack of competition and more of a camaraderie of, hey, we're trying to serve just more people, help more people. And it takes a group effort, not one person, not one firm.
Yeah. And to your point, like if you think about it, like if you took on every person that came into your sphere, like at some point there's the law of diminishing return, right? Like we talk about that a lot. And I'm not going to be able to serve. I can only serve so many people effectively. I think
Right.
that's what people, you know, you need to realize is that the reason why sometimes an advisor maybe has a limit on the amount of clients that they're taking is because they want to be able to actually advise their clients on their finances. And if you have, you know, a couple hundred, clients, that can become difficult to do that. So that's a really great point. So yeah, so we met through Elements. And for those that don't know what Elements is, if you follow either one of us, shame on us. We're not doing a good enough job of talking about what Elements is. But let's do that since I think you started with Elements way before I did. I'm pretty sure. So what is Elements? Like if you were to describe it to somebody, like you're talking to me, I'm a new client, right? You're telling me about Elements. What would you say Elements is?
Yeah. So Elements is, and I like to use an analogy, kind of tell a story I think, to highlight it a little bit more. So it's really similar to whenever you go to the doctor and you get blood work done and they come back and they say, Billy, your cholesterol is X. Well, for me, I'm not a medical guy. obviously. So I'm like, okay, well, what does X mean? Is that in a good range? Is that healthy? Do I need to improve it? Is it too high? Is it too low? Like, give me a little bit more context here. Is that healthy? And that essentially is what Elements is. It has 11 key financial indicators, or I call them financial health indicators, where it's like the diagnostic tool. So I'm able to look at that and say, hey, your burn rate, which is your spending, that's in a healthy range, or actually that's a little bit high. Maybe we need to have a deeper conversation about spending, or you're actually saving a really healthy amount. So I don't think you need to worry about savings anymore because of this objective data that's in front of us based on your savings rate. So it really gives me, the advisor, a ton of information, but also then able to explain it in a really simple way, because all of these indicators are just simple division problems. And it makes it really easy to explain to clients, and clients pick up on it really quick. I know you have meaningful conversations on a daily to weekly basis too. And I always love asking you, I asked you right before we jumped on the call, hey, what meaningful conversations have you had recently? And you shared an awesome one with me. And Elements really just allows us to be in the present. Where are we today with our money? We're organized. Am I financially healthy? How do we answer that financial question and identify the next small step that you should take with your money and feel confident about your finances? So kind of in a nutshell, that's what Elements does.
I love it. I love it. And I use that same analogy, all the time. If you walk into your doctor's office, hopefully your doctor's not going to tell you, go get a CAT scan. You're like, doc, I didn't even told you what's wrong with me yet. I don't even know what's wrong with you yet. Right. But you're automatically, and I think that's where I'm going to lead the next question into, is traditional financial planning versus kind of what we do. Is way different, right? Traditionally speaking, it's really product driven, right? And we both work for firms, that have that's just the way it was, right? Hey, it was like, you have a problem, here's the product that's going to fix the problem. But
Yep.
how's that product really intermingle amongst the rest of your finances, right? Yeah, I fixed this one problem, but did that cause another problem over here that I'm now unaware of? So, in your mind, or especially for the listeners, especially because of the group of people that we work with, younger millennial type of, that demographic, that might not know this. What is your viewpoint on traditional financial planning versus what you do?
Yeah. So what I do is, I like to call it real life financial planning, or present day financial planning. None of us know what the next 30 years of our life are going to look like. And yes, it's good that we have a general idea of where we want to go. If we're in New York and we know we want to go somewhere out on the West Coast, okay, great. It's helpful that we know we want to start the direction west versus take a flight and go over to Europe. So it's incredibly helpful that we have an idea of where we want to be. But I mean, essentially, traditional financial planning is asking, hey, when do you want to retire? And what are your utility bills going to be in 20, 30 years? It's like, dude, I don't know what they're going to be in 2 or 3 years, or I don't know what my life looks like then, let alone the next 30. So what ends up happening is we're so focused on the future that we're not able to enjoy the present. And oftentimes we're not even motivated, because if we're focused so far in the future, that's not near as motivating. So, for example, I worked with or had a meeting with a prospect a couple years ago, and I did the traditional financial planning, more of that old school projection, where I hadn't actually connected with Elements yet. So that was just all I had at the time. And I would show them, okay, hey, if we do this Roth conversion, if we do this tax strategy here, and when you're 55 years old, and like, look, we're going to increase your total net worth by $2 million by the time you're 85 or 90 years old. So it's like, I was, quote unquote, Billy, adding value, right? That's what I was
Yes.
taught to do. And I was even quantifying it. I was like, here's the specific numbers, and here's this cool projection and this line. And he said, like, yeah, sure, like, let's get started. And then ghosted me. I didn't hear from him. I'm even like, dude, just please tell me if you're not interested. That's totally fine. But it's like, tell me like what's going on. We ended up reconnecting almost a year later. And in that first meeting, because I told him some of my process had changed, I showed him Elements, not even his specific numbers at that point, but just showed him Elements, highlighted that process of that present day financial planning and how it could help him. And he signed up immediately. And by the way, for a fee that was higher than I even quoted him the year before. Even though before I
Yeah.
thought I added so much value, it was like, it wasn't like, if we think we're adding value, like, our opinion doesn't matter as much as the end client. Because if the client is like, hey, this is incredibly valuable, that's where we need to be running, versus what we think is valuable or what the industry teaches us is important.
That is really profound what you just said there. And it kind of leads me to my next question and I know you said your financial kind of process changed, right? Traditionally, they probably came in, you're like, great, what age do you want to retire? How much money do you want to have? Right? You're asking all those questions. You're like, man, I'm really helping these people, right? They're really getting a lot out of this. And it wasn't until personally, with elements, right? Well, I think one thing about elements is it not only it changes the way you talk to clients, but it also changes the way you think about financial planning, right?
Yes.
Like it changes. Like I think, I was on the Elements podcast and they asked me the question, like, what was the moment like? And I was like, it was basically like when Neo was in the Matrix and he was given an option of going back to the Matrix or living, in the real world. And it was like, oh, I can't unsee what I have to go this way. And so for me, I know the first meeting, right, is really an important meeting. And it's really getting to know your client, right? And it's something that you said earlier that was really impactful. It was like what I think the client needs, right? Traditionally speaking, like this is what you need. This is what I think you need. And it didn't resonate with that guy. He was just like, yeah, that sounds good, but like how does that, that obviously there was something that he was needing that you weren't giving in that first initial go around, right? So
Right.
I know your process is different now. So if somebody's coming to talk to you, what does that first initial meeting look like? What does that first initial or that conversation look like now compared to what it was when you first started?
Yeah. So that shifted. I still lead with a lot of the soft stuff. So typically it starts with a quick 15-minute call just to see, hey, what are you looking for? What are you looking for out of a financial planner? What are the top money questions you have? Is there anything that's specifically causing you stress? Even, hey, why now? Was there a change in your life? Was there an inheritance, or you just got married, or other kind of life event that's causing you to reach out to a planner? So get a little bit of that backstory and then start figuring out what's important to them. So I
Mm.
think you asked this question too. Shout out to Carl Richards because that's where it came from in the One Page Plan. Incredible book. As an incredible human being as well. But why is money important to you? So sometimes that'll
Mm.
get asked in that first 15 minutes. Sometimes those go a little bit longer if we've got the time and that's where the conversation takes us. But if not, in between that 15-minute call, if we decide it makes sense to have a more in-depth, I like to call them strategy sessions instead of meetings, because meetings are boring, but strategy sessions are much more insightful. And we leave with specific action steps based on what's important to the client after every single one of those strategy sessions. So again, I think they're a little bit more valuable than a typical boring meeting. Anyway, so we'll have that Zoom strategy session, and that's when we'll really dive into why is money important to them if we haven't already. What was money like growing up? Because that's one of my favorite questions too, because it really gives me as the planner so much insight into the way that they perceive and interact with money even today, no matter how many years later. So very insightful question and answer for me to have. And then from there, they've already filled out their element scorecard. So it takes about 7 to 10 minutes for these clients to fill out some basic information. And that gives me those financial health indicators, like I was talking about before, very similar to blood work that the doctor comes in with. Then I'm able to leave that strategy session and leave them with, hey, here's some top ideas. I think you need some term life insurance, or we need to have a deeper discussion on how to save to buy a house, or, hey, this is a tax strategy that might make sense to continue to explore farther. So even if they don't become a client after that initial set of that call and that strategy session, they're leaving with a one-page plan that has their statement of financial purpose, what some of their goals are, and then specifically what steps they need to take, regardless of whether they work with me or not. So that's kind of how the process has shifted versus, hey, I need all of this information up front. You need to spend hours getting me all your documents, everything with a dollar sign on it, versus, hey, I'm just asking for 10 minutes for you to fill out your information in a client-led onboarding process with this cool app, Elements, and then we're going to have a meaningful conversation about it.
Yeah, I love it. It's because again, I was doing traditional financial planning, and the conversations are just better around people's money. You get to understand what people actually want, and then the biggest thing is it feels less pressure, right? Because like you said, if you're having to give me your entire life for me to even in order for me to talk to you, like that's a huge undertaking. And that could already put stress on the relationship. Whereas I'm like, hey, just give me what you got. let's look at it and let's see if we need to take a deeper dive into this stuff, right? So yeah, I love that. I love that. Question I have here, right? Kind of shifting gears a little bit. We talked about elements, how, and how we're different in the sense of, how we're doing financial planning. But you and I are both heavy on social media. And at the end, definitely we're going to, get people to go follow you and stuff like that. You'll give us where they can follow you at. But with that said, right, we're heavy into social media, we're heavy into financial literacy, and telling people, some of the things that they should do or they should be wary of and stuff like that. But I guess my question is, um, with financial literacy and us being so pro social media, how do we handle the other side of social media in the sense of all the information that's out there? Does that make sense? Does that do you get where I'm going there?
Yeah, absolutely. So social media in general, but we'll look at it in the lens of financial planning and financial literacy. It's a blessing and a curse, right? So
Yes.
it's great that there's so much information out there. It's also bad that there's so much information out there. So it's how do you really filter through? So I know a lot of your content speaks to this. A lot of my content speaks to this. It's how do you know that you can trust that person? How do you know that you can trust that advice? Because there is some really, really bad advice out there on social media, as I'm sure your listeners know as well, where you're seeing like, oh, you can just write off your chihuahua for your business and your home office. It's and oftentimes there's just enough inkling of truth in some of the specific tactics, but they're taken out of context. Because especially when it comes to tax planning, it's like, oh, the IRS says this. It's like, yeah, but you have to understand the purpose of that. Like, you can't just pull this one thing out of context and say that you can just start, quote unquote, writing off your life because your life is a business expense.
Yeah.
Heard that. It's crazy. So you got to be mindful of who you're following. What potential conflicts of interest are there? If someone is only talking about one specific, and like you said at the beginning, Billy, was product. If someone's only talking about product, there's probably a conflict of interest because they're trying to sell you that one specific product. And if all roads or all quote unquote advice is leading to a product sale, or you have to give me money to manage, then things are I think that changes versus, hey, here's just some general ideas on whether or not you work with Billy, or whether or not you work with Brandon. This is good for you to do. Hey, calculate your savings rate. Here's what I think is healthy. And if it's not that, make a plan to increase it. That's going to be good advice for anyone who's listening, right? And again, they could not even work with us after hearing that advice. And if they do it, they're still going to benefit. So I think that's probably one thing to look out for. It's like, do I have to work with this person to get value? Do I have to go through them to buy this particular product? Versus, I know your content is just leading with value. Hey, here's top questions that divorcees might have. Here's how I answer this particular question. Like, that's leading with value. And eventually people are like, okay, yeah, Billy really knows his stuff. He hasn't really even asked me for anything. I just want his knowledge and his insights. Because again, you're leading with value, and also you're a real financial professional, so you have good advice in addition to it. So that's just some things to look out for. Yeah, because I'm very pro social media. It's just, who are you following?
Yeah. I mean, we both feel the same way. It's funny. Like I said, we both follow each other, and so there'll be random times throughout the week that I'll just send you a random reel, or you send me a random reel. We have a good chuckle about it. And so it's so I guess the leading question here is obviously, again, who we work with are younger people. They're going to be on social media. And this is going to be something that's really in the foreseeable future, right? Like, this isn't something, social media is not just going to go away, right? And people producing bad content so they could sell a product or a course or whatever, right? Whatever they're trying to sell you. So you have clients that probably, I know I have clients, and I know you have clients that probably come to you and say, hey, Brandon, like, I just heard about infinite banking. Like, what do you think? Like, how do you handle those conversations? Well, I'm sure you're probably excited to have those conversations. You're like, wow, they really appreciate my advice. They're coming to me with this idea. And like, so how do you handle when a client comes to you with that type of advice? Because you don't want to be like, or not advice, you don't want to be just like, hey, that's stupid. Don't listen to that. You want to value, hey, I'm glad you're looking at information, but so how do you handle when you have clients that are coming to you with like social media posts and stuff like that and asking you questions?
Yeah, you're right. So one, I'm super honored and ecstatic to answer financial questions in general. So definitely very happy that they bring those to me. And recently, because I've had that happen a little bit more, Billy, I've actually I need to officially put this on my website, but I've told clients, hey, if you see things on social media, you see things on YouTube, feel free to send it my way, and I'm happy to, for my planning clients, answer their question, not just in vague generalities of, hey, here's this concept, here's how it works, does it make sense or does it not, but even speak directly to their situation. If they're that full-on planning client. And I even tell them too, because I really do genuinely want them to send me this, because I know if they're seeing this, then that means other people are too. So what I'll do is be able to answer their question personally, but then also be able to turn that into content, because I know other people are asking the same questions because they're seeing the same content. So that's been just kind of almost a new service offering that has just kind of sprung up, because there is so much of this. Oftentimes it's only been bad advice that I've seen that people have sent me. So then how do I navigate that? Back to your original question, Billy. So, right. It's not, hey, this is stupid, this is why it doesn't work. It's just really educational. It's leading with education, obviously empathy too, because they want my professional opinion and how it applies to their situation. So I'm happy to give them that answer. I just explain how it works. And again, I don't want to talk about a specific strategy, but it ends up being, hey, this is not a super efficient way to do this. Maybe this could start to make sense if you're making X amount of dollars or you have X net worth. But for right now, with your situation, because of X, Y, and Z, I really don't think it makes much sense. So then you're explaining the why behind it, because I think if we just shut it down, nope, that's bad. It's like, well, the client's not going to know, is it actually bad, or does Billy or Brandon just not have access to this particular product? Right? Hey, maybe it's not the best for you. And you share that again. I think the why is so important. We've talked about that already on the podcast, but the why is so important, because when you explain it in that way and through their lens, through their values, I think it just makes so much more sense, because now it's personalized advice and not just this vague, everyone should use tactic X.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that answer, because it's also on the flip side, the one time that we actually do get some good advice or some good content, and a client, because I've had that happen where a client brought me something and was like, hey, what do you think about this? And I'm like, looking at their situation, looking at their scorecard, and be like, hey, you know what? This is actually a good strategy. We could employ this or deploy this, and this is what it could do for you. But also, we need to be wary. Hey, these are the cons that we need to worry about as well. But it's really it's a two-way street there. It's just I've run into less of those, more so like the other ones, right, and stuff like that. So, but yeah, I think that's important for people to understand, is that we want you to bring financial questions. I think traditionally speaking, most if if people even talk to their advisor once a year, right? We want you to have conversations with us, right? We want to be actively helping you manage not just investments, right? No one wants to just be an account manager. We want to actually help you manage your life through your finances. And so, yeah, I love that answer. So, I got to ask this question. So, and you don't have to specifically say a pet peeve, but what are any pet peeves that you see on social media coming from financial literacy side of things that you're just like, dude, like if this could end tomorrow, it would, it would definitely help.
Yeah. So I could go into a ton of different tactics, but instead I'll go into always and never advice. Always and never advice, because
Yes.
there are so many nuances. It's personal finance because it's personal. So when it's always do this or never do that, I'm like, there's very few things. And now, someone could come up, well, Brandon, what about this? Do I always or never do this? Like, fine, there's going to be some anomalies, and there's going to be some things that you can find that always and never might actually make sense. But say for the vast majority, very high percentage, it's not always. Hey, you should always be saving X. It's like, what if someone's at a different stage in their life? What if there's a huge inheritance coming their way? Or what if there's already a huge trust fund? Or what if they're reinvesting into there's so many nuances to all of these. So once I see always and never advice, I'm just like, well, you can probably tune that out more often than not. That's because it just needs to be applied to your unique situation. So yeah, that's an easy one for me. Always and never advice. Not a fan.
Yeah. For me, it's always, it's again, I'm not a black and white type of person, right? Life is a lot of gray area, right? There's a lot of nuance to life. And so when I have people come at me for, this is the one asset that you need to have in order to build wealth, or this is the one thing you need to do to build wealth. It's like, no, there are actually multiple ways to do it. And
Proven.
it depends, and it depends on what you want as your lifestyle, right? One of the questions that Elements helps us answer is, do I have the right mix of assets, right? And that's probably my favorite area to operate in, besides, are we using our income wisely, is probably the two questions I live in the most, right? And so what one asset works for somebody, right? Whether that be real estate, whatever, right? Might not work for Joe Schmo down the street. He might not ever want to be a landlord, right? Like, he might be fine working his 9-to-5 job and not want to do that, right? But do they get him to the same place, right? Like, the ultimate goal is to build assets. That's the ultimate goal, right? So that's kind of my pet peeve, so to speak. I think you'd probably feel the same way, right?
Yeah. I think that those are relatively similar. Do this one thing always and never. Like, they're right in the same tree. And again, you can then insert all sorts of tactics below both of those statements. Do this one thing, or always and never. Have an unlimited number.
I was just thinking about a good always statement is probably, don't accrue high interest credit card debt, right? That's probably an always, right? You probably don't need to do that. But there's, like you said, those are few and far between. Most of it's a lot of nuance. Something I forgot to ask you about Elements. What is, for those, again, for those that don't know what Elements is, definitely go back and rewatch this. But what is your favorite element? I don't think I've ever asked this question to you before.
If I have to use one, just one?
Yes, one element.
That's tough. Okay, so if I have to only choose one, because there are several that I use really frequently, it's the liquid term score. So cash plus your brokerage account, so like your Robinhood, E-Trade account, divided by your annual spending. So a 0.5 score means you have 0.5 years of quick access to money, or 6 months. So think of this like your emergency fund. Obviously, I'm sharing that for your audience because, Billy, you very much know what liquid term is. It's probably one of your favorites too. But the reason why it's so important is because I've noticed this with clients who have a high net worth and who don't have much net worth. But if a client if you don't have access to money, quick access to money through a savings account, checking account, bank account, cash, you are going to feel more stressed. I'm working with a prospect, 16-ish million or so net worth, some family stuff going on, unfortunately, but almost no liquidity. And she's very stressed about money. Not because of the total net worth, but because almost all of it is tied up. Can't touch it. So she's feeling stressed out, even though that number for the majority of people are like, oh my gosh, how could you possibly ever be stressed with a net worth that high? It's like, well, I can tell you, you don't have enough liquidity. You don't have enough quick access to money. So really that one, and again, if you have appropriate liquidity, quick access to money, you're going to feel less financial stress. It's not going to eliminate financial stress. No amount of money is just going to eliminate financial stress, I don't believe, but it will reduce it. Very confident with that.
Yeah, I do love liquid term. I think my favorite one, and they're probably pretty close to yours, but I love savings rate. It's such an easy topic to talk about, because if most people aren't saving enough of their income, right? We both know that, right? We sit down with lots of people and we see the numbers, right? And just to be able to sit there and just say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Client, right? We both agree. You would agree that you're not saving enough of your income, right? And instead of talking in dollars and cents, like saying, hey, you need to save an extra $1,500 a month, right, in order to hit your goals, right? Like, what happens if you have the conversation like, hey, you're at 5% of your income right now, what you're saving? What would it look like? What would it take for us to move up to 6% or 7%, right? The goal is not to get to 20, 25% of your income overnight. If you can, great, we'll do that. But how do we get to 6 or 7? Do you feel confident in doing that? And most people are like, 6 or 7, 1%, I could do that. Yeah, that seems reasonable, right? And so that's how I use that element in a lot of my conversations. And it gives them something to get excited about, right? Like they're like, oh, I'm at 7%. Like, let's get to 10, right? And it keeps moving us into that habit of saving your income.
And
So that's
that's real financial planning right there, everyone. Like, it's not like, sure, is quote unquote optimal from a numerical perspective, maybe getting closer to that 15 or 20. Yeah, absolutely. But again, Billy, imagine you just said, hey, yeah, we got to bump this savings rate up by 15% overnight. No chance. They're going to do nothing, or they're going to try it for 1 month, just like a really, really bad diet or restrictive diet. You do it for a week and then you stop, you fall off the wagon, and it's maybe worse than before. Same concept here, because what you're doing is you're setting a goal and then also helping with the behavioral change. And that's real life financial planning. Showing them some number 30 years in the future, that's not exciting. That's not exciting. But hey, what if you go to 1? And then you start to see that, I'm sure you've seen this too, they see that momentum. Oh, I got to 1 more. Oh, I got to 7. Oh, I'm at 8. Oh, I can do this, because now they've experienced these wins. And just psychologically, it's easier to take action when you're being rewarded for it and they're seeing it. So kudos. That's I've heard that story before from you, but I just love it every time. It's so cool. Love it.
Yeah. It's like I said, it's different in it's having real conversations with real people about money, and ultimately that's we're advisors, right? We're meant to advise people on the aspects of their life, and so yeah, I mean, listen, that today was amazing. I'd love for you to share a little bit about where people can get in contact with you. If they're watching this, they're like, hey, like I really like Brandon. And listen, as another advisor, like I love that. I'm personality driven. I'm not going to jive with everybody. That's cool. They might jive with you. And like you said, I'd much rather somebody get real financial advice rather than get what's what we've seen out in the world. So tell everybody how they can get a hold of you, where they can find you at, especially on social media.
Yeah, so I think easiest there. So I'm most active on Instagram. I post to all the platforms eventually, but Instagram's my main platform. You can find me at Galici Financial. So that's Galici Financial. So last name. And then also GaliciFinancial.com. You can check out my website. There's a contact form there with my email. You can contact me through either of those ways, or just creep and see the content I post and see if you jive with it.
I love that. People creep on. It happens all the time, right? People creep on your social media, and then like 6 months later, like, hey, I watched this video where you did. You're like, what video? You're trying to remember what video you posted. You're like, that was like 10 months ago, bro. Like, I have no idea. Okay, great. Let's have a conversation, right? So yeah, I love it. But Brandon, I really appreciate today, and you coming on, having a conversation, and just, like I said, talking shop. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thanks so much for having me on, Billy. And thanks for all that you're doing for the industry too, and for your clients. Every single time we connect, you always have a story of just the meaningful conversations and the true impact that you're having in clients' lives. So thanks for all you do as well. And it was so much fun to be here.
Cool. I really appreciate that. So everybody, make sure you go download this. You go check out Brandon's stuff. But like I said, I appreciate everybody that downloads this and watches this. So this was another episode on the Money Talk. We will see you next week. So have a good one. We'll talk to you soon.